10 years ago, they called off the search and buried an empty urn with my name. Today, I walked into my sister's vow renewal in Carmel wearing a black suit and a new name. Nobody recognized me until I reached the mic and said, Eliza Barrett. I watched my father's face turn to stone as the FBI stepped in and handcuffed him mid-ceremony. They said I was dead. But I came back with truth, with evidence, and with a voice they can't silence. If you've ever felt erased by your own family, you're not alone. My name is Eliza. And this is the story of how I took back everything. Let me take you to the moment they thought I disappeared. The ocean breeze smelled like salt and champagne. From where I stood just beyond the white rose trellis arching over the cliffside lawn, I could see everything. The glittering lights strung across the palm trees. The ice sculpture in the shape of a swan. The string quartet playing a slow, honeyed version of At Last. Guests in silk dresses and tuxedos clinking flutes of vintage rosé, their laughter rising and falling with the crash of waves below. And there she was. Amanda. My little sister stood in the center of it all, glowing under the golden light of late afternoon. She wore a new white dress, not quite a wedding gown, but close. Off the shoulder sleeves, a plunging neckline, intricate beadwork that caught every shard of light. She held a bouquet of white orchids and blue thistle, her signature palette. Always had to make a statement. Her husband Noah stood beside her, tall, polished, exuding that carefully tailored charisma that made him the media's favorite rising star in California politics. 10 years of marriage. 10 years since their first wedding. 10 years since the day I disappeared. The irony was sharp enough to taste. This beautiful coastal estate, this picture-perfect renewal ceremony, all of it paid for by silencing me. The family they built on the grave of a daughter they'd rather forget. I stayed just beyond the stone archway, cloaked in the shadows of blooming bougainvillea. I could smell the vanilla candles lining the aisle, could hear the rustle of designer gowns brushing manicured grass, but no one turned my way. Not yet. To them, I didn't exist. Amanda stepped forward, raising her glass for the first toast. Her voice rang out clear and confident, just like always. She thanked their parents, their friends, the donors who helped Noah's campaign. Her tone dripped with sincerity. The kind that photographs well. I hadn't heard her voice in 10 years, yet it hadn't changed. It still had that bright, polished charm, the kind of voice that made people lean in and believe every word. Her smile was perfect, so were her teeth. So was her life. And somewhere in the back, their mother Vivian dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Her hair was shorter, now dyed a sleek platinum blonde, her diamonds glinting in the sun. Beside her, Howard stood as stoic as ever in a crisp navy suit, hands clasped in front like he was preparing to deliver a eulogy instead of celebrating a vow renewal. I clenched my fists in the folds of my jacket. They all looked older, yes. But not broken. Not haunted. Certainly not like people who'd faked a daughter's mental breakdown to cover up a scandal that could have ruined everything. My name had been wiped clean from their mouths. From family photos. From the family trust. Eliza Barrett declared missing in July of 2015. Presumed dead. No body ever found. A closed casket ceremony, a headstone by the water with a quote from a poem I never liked. No investigation. No justice. Just silence. Amanda toasted her husband next, her voice softening. She squeezed Noah's hand and he lifted hers to his lips. The crowd cooed. The photographer clicked away. Everyone smiled like they believed in fairy tales. I watched in stillness. Cold stone at my back, warm sun on my face, and a storm building in my chest. Then it happened. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes turned the corner. His eyes scanned the crowd lazily until they landed on me. He froze. Just a second. His steps hesitated, brows furrowed, something flickered in his face. Recognition, confusion, I couldn't be sure. His lips parted slightly like he might say something. I tilted my chin and walked past him, heels quiet against the stone. His gaze followed me, but he said nothing. I didn't look back. The string quartet shifted into a lilting rendition of Can't Help Falling in Love. Amanda threw her head back and laughed at something Noah whispered. I could almost hear her giggle, the same high breathy sound from when we used to share bunk beds and secrets. I remembered the earrings she was wearing. Diamond studs. They were supposed to be my graduation gift from Stanford. I had picked them out myself months before the ceremony. But after everything happened, they were reassigned to Amanda as a bridal gift. Because dead girls don't need jewelry. The guests began to settle. The MC stepped forward with a practiced smile, gesturing for everyone to take their seats for the vows. The chairs were whitewood wrapped with silk ribbons. Even from here, I could see my name wasn't on any of them. I took a slow breath, letting the salty air fill my lungs. The Pacific stretched endlessly behind the altar, glittering like it had secrets of its own. I had once thought about disappearing into that ocean. Once. But I didn't. Instead, I became someone they'd never expect to return. No one noticed the woman standing in the shadows. Not the bridesmaids sipping cocktails, not the guests laughing in circles, not even the people who once swore they loved me. The only eyes that had really seen me were the waiters. And even he wasn't sure. Good. Let them doubt. Let them wonder. Amanda and Noah stepped forward. The officiant welcomed everyone with a warm smile and asked them to open their hearts to the vows about to be renewed. Someone sniffled. A phone camera flashed. And still, I waited. 10 years had passed. I had waited this long. A few more minutes wouldn't kill me. But they might kill someone else. I stepped further into the shade and adjusted the strap of my bag. Inside, neatly packed, were documents. Photos. Records. A flash drive. Truths no one here was prepared for. They thought today was about love, about endurance, about happily ever after. But it wasn't. Today was about to become the day the Barrett family stopped pretending. And I had waited long enough. I still remember the smell of eucalyptus and hospital-grade disinfectant. It was June of 2015, and I was walking down the east corridor of the psychiatry wing at Santa Clara Medical, clutching a folder of research notes for my senior thesis. I had planned to surprise my dad with a quick lunch. He'd been practicing there for over 15 years, revered by colleagues, adored by patients. To the world, Dr. Howard Barrett was the gold standard of compassionate care. To me, he was just Dad. Until that day. The door to his private consultation suite was ajar. I knocked lightly, but no one answered. Curious, I pushed it open. What I saw didn't make sense at first. My dad sat on the couch, his shirt sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. Beside him was a woman no older than 30, legs curled under her, one hand on his chest. Her voice was low, laughing softly. His hand rested on her knee. I froze. He saw me before she did. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment everything stopped. Then he stood fast, like he could physically block what I'd seen. Eliza, he said too quickly, you shouldn't be here. I just stared at him. The woman turned, surprised, her smile slipping into something uncertain. I recognized her. Her name was Dahlia. 29. Diagnosed with bipolar II. She was part of the case study group my thesis had focused on. My dad was her primary psychiatrist. I left without speaking. The next few days were a blur. I tried to process it, to rationalize it, but there was no excuse. It was an ethical breach of the highest order. A violation of trust, of care, of medical law. I gathered everything. Notes. Dates. Observations from my research logs. It wasn't just a moment of weakness, it was sustained, groomed. He had manipulated a vulnerable patient under his care. I went to the ethics board at Stanford Medical. Quietly, respectfully. I thought they'd want to know. That truth would matter. Instead, the board chair, Dr. Ling, gave me a tight smile and said there wasn't enough to act on. My evidence was circumstantial. She reminded me that false accusations could have severe consequences. Then the whispers started. In the department halls. Among professors. Among students. Eliza's having a breakdown. Eliza's been stressed. Eliza's making things up for attention. My advisor began avoiding me. My internship at the neuroscience lab was suddenly revoked. A week later, I was called into the campus counseling center. The therapist they assigned me had a file already prepared. Printed in red ink at the top was one word: paranoia. I remember laughing because it felt absurd. Until I realized they were serious. I called my mother. She didn't pick up. I texted Amanda. She replied with, maybe take some time off. You're spiraling. Spiraling. I was the one trying to protect a patient. They made me out to be unstable, dangerous. And then came the worst part. On July 17th, I left Stanford's library late at night, heading north along Highway 1 in my black Volvo. That was the last anyone officially heard from me. Except I never made it to the coast. A mile outside of Half Moon Bay, my brakes failed, or rather they didn't exist anymore. The car veered, skidded, flipped twice, and landed just short of the cliffside. But I wasn't in it. Because I had felt something off before I even started the engine. So I walked away. Fast. 2 hours later, the car exploded. The next day, the news reported Eliza Barrett, 22, missing. Possible accident. Presumed dead. My student ID had been conveniently found near the wreckage. My phone had been crushed, but not beyond recognition. My parents held a press conference outside our home in Palo Alto. My mother wore black and sobbed into a handkerchief. My father kept his hand on her back, his jaw clenched in what looked like noble grief. Amanda stood beside them, eyes swollen. She gave the camera a small, brave smile when she said, "We just want her home. No matter what happened. We forgive her. Forgive me." They spun the narrative fast. My mental deterioration. My erratic behavior. That I had stopped taking medication I was never prescribed. That I may have harmed myself. Within 3 months, they filed for a death certificate. A closed casket ceremony followed. I watched it from a distance. Literally. I stood across the street behind a tree in a borrowed hoodie and a pair of sunglasses too big for my face. I saw my name etched in marble before I ever graduated. My friends laid flowers on a coffin that held nothing but rocks and regret. No one questioned it. No one looked closer. The insurance was paid out. The Barrett name remained untarnished, and Dr. Howard Barrett received a humanitarian award the following spring for his contributions to psychiatric medicine. I spent the next 6 years hiding under different names in different cities. First Santa Fe, then Spokane, then Missoula. I worked at diners, cleaned motel bathrooms, washed dishes at greasy roadhouses. I watched my student loans disappear with my identity. I watched Amanda get married on the cover of a bridal magazine. I watched my mother open a boutique wellness retreat in Napa. I watched them thrive. And I waited. Waited for a crack to form. Waited for a reason to resurface. Waited for someone to care enough to look for the truth. No one did. So I became my own reason. When I turned 28, I returned to California quietly. I started working at a legal records firm under a new name. I learned everything I could about estate law, about malpractice suits, about power of attorney. I built a file. A thick, ugly, irrefutable file. And when the time was right, I reached out to someone who could use it well. Now standing in the shadows of this vow renewal, watching them toast a perfect 10-year marriage, I knew one thing for certain. They thought they buried me. But I was the one holding the shovel now. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and overcooked bacon. That was where I landed when I crossed the California state line into Nevada, dragging a duffel bag with everything I owned and a name that didn't belong to me. Claire Monroe. Age 23. No social security record past age 18. No family, no past. The manager at Lucky's Diner didn't ask questions. He handed me an apron and said, "You smile, you pour coffee, and you don't mouth off to truckers." I said I could do that. At night, I crashed on a cot in the back of a closed-down beauty salon 2 blocks away. The owner, a widow named Marcia, let me stay in exchange for sweeping hair and fixing leaky sinks. My fingers bled more than once, trying to learn how to fix things. I didn't complain. The ache of being invisible started to dull. It became routine, 1 cup of coffee at a time, 1 empty stare at a time. Until Anita Torres walked in. She came in on a Tuesday morning wearing a red scarf and humming Billie Holiday. She sat at booth 5 and ordered black coffee and toast, nothing else. Her eyes were sharp, not judging, just watching. I brought her coffee and tried not to flinch when she said, "You're too smart for this place." I smiled but didn't answer. Next time she came in, she brought a newspaper. Slid it across the table when I topped off her cup. Page 7 had an article about Stanford's recent law school graduates. She tapped one name. "That ever cross your mind?" she asked. "Law school," I almost laughed. Instead, I cleared her plate. Third time she waited until I was off shift. She handed me a bag of fresh bagels and told me to walk with her. We sat on a bench outside the post office. "I used to practice law in Phoenix," she said. Corporate side. Retired early. Burnout, divorce, cancer scare. Pick one. She glanced sideways. "You're not just hiding, you're waiting. And you won't last long unless you do something that makes you feel real again." I didn't speak for a long time. Then I asked her hypothetically how someone might pursue a law degree without a legal identity. She didn't blink. Just said, "You're not the first ghost I've met, Claire." The next few months were filled with paper trails and false starts. Anita had a friend who worked at a local community college. They let me audit some classes under my alias. Philosophy. Intro to Constitutional Law. Ethics. Ethics was bitterly ironic. But the fire in my chest, the one that had burned quietly for so long, flickered back to life. Anita pushed me hard. Every paper came back covered in red ink. She made me rewrite arguments 3 times until they had backbone. She didn't care about my past, she cared about my mind. I rented a room above a hardware store. Bought a second-hand laptop. Took the LSAT using a loophole through a small online testing center in Reno. Scored in the top 5%. Anita said she was proud. I almost cried. By 25, I had earned admission to Desert Valley School of Law. It wasn't Harvard or Yale, but it had a tough criminal justice program and access to real courtrooms. I used my tuition grant to take classes and worked nights filing case records at the county clerk's office. And slowly, quietly, I started building my file. I found out that Dr. Howard Barrett had hired a private attorney named Raymond Porter to file my death certificate. The same Raymond Porter who handled all of our family's estate matters. The same one who notarized the sale of my college fund into a trust for Amanda's new condo. I requested public records under my alias. At first, it was just out of curiosity. Then it became routine. Patterns emerged. Dates that didn't align, signatures that looked copied and pasted. A notary stamp that had been suspended months before my death certificate was filed. It wasn't just my father who covered it up. Porter had helped, legally, professionally, willingly. I created a timeline. Labeled every action with a date and consequence. On the wall of my studio apartment, it looked like a murder board. But it was really just the truth laid bare. My father had broken medical law. Porter had falsified legal documents, and the entire Barrett family had benefited from my absence. Still, I wasn't planning revenge. I wanted something bigger. I wanted exposure. I started writing a motion draft during my second year. Not to file. Just to practice. I outlined a civil suit for wrongful death declaration, misuse of trust funds, and legal malpractice. Anita reviewed it with a single raised eyebrow and muttered, "You could ruin lives with this." I said nothing. Because the part she didn't know was that I wasn't just preparing documents, I was also watching. Amanda's husband Noah had announced his candidacy for state senate that spring. Their social media pages were curated and polished. I watched interviews. I took screenshots. I noted every mention of family values and honesty. My mother had rebranded herself as a lifestyle coach. She hosted webinars about overcoming grief. I watched clips of her saying how losing her firstborn had taught her to treasure the present. I wrote down every lie. I wasn't reckless, I was patient. Anita once said the law moves slow because justice takes time. But I had already waited too long to be anyone's cautionary tale. By the time I graduated, I had an unofficial record of everything they had ever done to erase me. And when I walked across that small stage wearing a plain black robe with no family in the crowd, I didn't feel sadness. I felt focus. That summer, Anita hugged me outside the courthouse steps and said, Now a counselor, I looked out toward the city skyline, heat rising off the pavement. Now I said I go home. The apartment I rented in Ridgefield sat 3 blocks from a laundromat and 2 from a church where no one asked questions. I signed the lease under the name Claire Monroe, still careful, still watching. But the town hadn't changed much. The same cracked sidewalks, the same quiet streets, the same florist on Maple Avenue with hand-painted signs in the window. Amanda's wedding was a week away. It felt surreal being this close again. Like time had folded in on itself, compressing a decade of grief into a single breath. I walked past our old neighborhood twice, but never turned onto the street. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I unpacked. I laid out the letters. They were all still with me. Over 100 envelopes, none of them stamped. Some written on diner napkins, some on lined notebook paper, some typed in the dead of night while tears blurred the screen. All addressed to Amanda. None ever mailed. I used to think if I just said the right thing, if I found the perfect combination of words, she'd understand. She'd know I hadn't left her. That I hadn't wanted to vanish. That I had begged to stay. Dear Amanda, I miss you more than I can explain. Dear Amanda, remember the mint lip gloss you stole from my drawer when you were 13? I never told Mom. Dear Amanda, you were my best friend. You always were. The letters were everything I couldn't scream into the void. They kept me tethered even when I didn't know if she hated me or thought I was dead. And for a long time, I believed she was innocent. That changed the day I saw the press release announcing her engagement to Noah Lennox. The same Noah who had dated me for 2 years in college. The same Noah who had once told me I was the only person who ever made him feel seen. Now he was the golden boy marrying into the family that had erased me. That day I stopped writing. But I never threw the letters away. 2 days before the ceremony, I visited the cemetery. Ridgefield Memorial Gardens was cold and too polished, with manufactured stones and fountains that made grief feel sterile. I found it. The plaque. Eliza Jane Barrett, 1993. 2015, beloved daughter and sister. She walked with light. It took everything in me not to rip the bronze off the stone. I stood there staring until my knees gave out. I sat on the damp grass and pulled a folded letter from my pocket. The last one I ever wrote. My hands trembled as I held it. You don't know what they did. You don't know what they took from me. And if you did, would you still stand with them? I didn't leave the letter. I never left them. I kept them all. The groundskeeper passed by and paused. He looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "You her sister?" I froze. He didn't wait for a reply. Just reached into his back pocket and handed me something wrapped in plastic. A small weathered envelope, edges curled from time. It had my name. Not Claire. Eliza. Found this in the urn years ago. Parents came back for the ashes, told me to toss the note. I didn't. My throat closed. My fingers shook as I unwrapped it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Amanda. Eliza, I don't believe you're gone. I feel you everywhere. In the wind. In the way the sun hits my window. In the dreams I can't explain. If you're still out there, I hope you know I never wanted to let you go. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to fight harder. I'm sorry I let them silence me. But I love you. Always. Amanda. The world tilted. For a second, everything blurred. She had tried. At least once. The letter was old, faded, but real. Amanda had written it and tried to leave it in the urn. My mother must have taken it before I ever knew. Buried it again in silence. Cut off the only attempt Amanda ever made to reach me. I stared at the ground, heart pounding against my ribs like a prisoner behind bars. Could I have been wrong? Had Amanda been another casualty just like me, the easy answer was to say no. To cling to the rage that had kept me alive this long. But rage doesn't survive evidence. Not when the evidence is inked in your sister's hand. I folded the letter carefully and placed it with the rest. I didn't forgive her. Not yet. But I didn't hate her either. That night, I returned to my apartment and read every letter again, all 102 of them. Some felt naive now. Others still rang true. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Because if Amanda had once tried to find me even in her own quiet way, then what did that mean for what I was about to do? What did it mean for the truth I was about to unleash? I watched the wedding announcement again. Her face was radiant. The perfect daughter. The perfect bride. The narrative was already sealed, but I was about to open a different one. I wasn't sure anymore if Amanda deserved what was coming, but I was certain my father did. And my mother. And the lawyer who signed the paper that said I was no longer alive. So I put the letters in a box, labeled it 2015-2025, and I locked it away. Because what was coming next wasn't about letters, it was about proof. I started with the county clerk's office not because I expected answers there, but because sometimes truth hides in bureaucracy. Ridgefield's municipal building was small, tucked between a diner and a hardware store with chipped linoleum floors and a front desk that smelled faintly of coffee and mothballs. The clerk looked half bored and half suspicious when I asked to view public records connected to Dr. Warren Whitman's private practice. She asked why. I smiled and said I was doing a research project on medical licensing and compliance. It wasn't entirely a lie. She led me to a dusty terminal in the back corner and typed in the access code. "You've got an hour," she said, then left me alone. The database was ancient. It wheezed and blinked like it hadn't been touched since the early 2000s. I typed in the name Whitman Medical and Diagnostic Center. Dozens of results popped up. Routine filings, licensing renewals, permit extensions. But then I found something odd. There were over 40 incident reports flagged but sealed. Each marked with internal notation referred to Office of Legal Counsel. No case numbers, no outcomes, just names. Patients who had filed complaints then suddenly retracted them or disappeared from the system altogether. One name jumped out. Maria Jennings. Age 32. Admitted for abdominal pain. Filed a complaint against Dr. Whitman in August 2013. Withdrawn 2 days later. I cross-referenced her address and found it connected to a vacant apartment in Ridgefield's old quarter. The building had been condemned. There was no follow-up, no forwarding address, no emergency contact. Then I found another. Kevin Tran. 19. Allergic reaction. Emergency visit in 2012. Filed complaint. Withdrawn after parental intervention. The pattern kept going. Dozens. I scribbled names and dates into a notebook, careful not to print anything that would draw attention. As I stood to leave, I noticed something else on the terminal. A section marked Sealed Depositions. It required credentials to access. I knew I wasn't the only one who had tried to look. Back at the apartment, I stared at my notes, heart pounding. My father had buried more than just me. I had suspected, but now I had evidence. Not enough to take to court, but enough to dig deeper. I needed help. The kind of help you don't find in Ridgefield, so I did something I hadn't done in 10 years. I used my real name. I emailed a contact I had never met but had read about in law school. Drew Hamilton. A former FBI agent who had investigated medical fraud cases in New York and Connecticut. He had been quoted in a case involving a pain clinic that falsified patient records. His name had come up twice in old journals. And once in an article that mentioned Whitman Medical but never pursued it. I sent a simple message. Agent Hamilton. You once looked into Whitman Medical and Diagnostic Center. I have reason to believe the truth is worse than what you found. My name is Eliza Barrett. I am not dead. Meet me. He replied 2 hours later. 3 days later, we met in a park in Stamford, Connecticut. He wore a faded baseball cap and a windbreaker. Late 40s. Sharp eyes. Voice like gravel. I've waited 10 years for this, he said, before I even sat down. He had suspected something but was pulled off the case after internal pressure. No evidence, no cooperation. Your father had friends in places I couldn't reach, he said. I handed him my notebook. He scanned it silently. This isn't enough, he said, finally. But it's a start. He offered to help but with a warning. If we did this, it wouldn't be quick, it wouldn't be clean. We'd need to build a case that could survive fire. I agreed. For the next 2 years, I lived in quiet duality. By day, I clerked at a small legal firm under the name Claire Monroe, learning motions and filings. By night, I met with Agent Hamilton. We mapped every patient report we could find, every sealed complaint, every nurse who had left suddenly, every medical supplier who stopped working with Whitman Medical without explanation. Then came the second twist. Hamilton received an old tip from a nurse who had once worked under my father. She had left the state, changed careers, but sent a message anonymously. Ask about Vivian Whitman, my mother. I froze when he told me. Why? Hamilton looked uncomfortable. She made a report once. Back in 2014. She went to a crisis center and said she feared for her safety. The report never went anywhere. She recanted. Said she was unstable. But the original statement was still on file, buried in internal logs. We found it. My mother had told a social worker that she believed her husband was drugging her, that he monitored her spending, blocked her phone access, and kept her isolated from extended family. She had tried to report suspected misconduct at the clinic but was told by her husband that she was mentally unwell. She was prescribed sedatives by a colleague of his. The handwriting was hers. The signature shaky but real. I sat in silence after reading it. All the years I'd thought she was just complicit. Cold. A silent partner. But now I wasn't sure. Had she tried? Had she been trapped just like me? That night, I didn't sleep. I opened every letter Amanda had ever written me. Just one. But it felt heavier now. Like there were words behind the words. My family wasn't just guilty. They were broken. It didn't change what I had to do, but it made it harder to breathe. Hamilton and I kept going. We followed the money, traced the shell companies that handled billing for the clinic, tracked down patients who had relocated or changed names. A few talked, most didn't. But we were getting closer. We weren't chasing vengeance anymore, we were chasing proof. Proof no one could deny. Not even them. I called the facility using a disposable phone, gave a false name, and asked if I could visit Vivian Whitman during visitor hours. They said yes, as long as I provided ID and signed the logbook. I thanked them, hung up, and stared at the wall for a long time. She had suffered a minor stroke 6 months ago. That much I knew from Hamilton's background check. My father had moved her into a long-term care center outside New Haven shortly after, citing her need for constant medical supervision. I doubted that was the full reason. He wanted her quiet, contained, somewhere no one would ask questions if she forgot her own name or failed to speak, but I had to see for myself. I wore a beige coat, pulled my hair back into a low ponytail, and left my real name buried in my back pocket. At the front desk, I wrote Claire Monroe, handed over a fake ID that matched, and smiled politely. The nurse barely glanced at me before buzzing open the security door. Room 214. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and boiled peas. Wheelchairs lined the walls, patients shuffled past with walkers, eyes vacant or wary. I hadn't stepped foot in a place like this since college. And never as someone pretending to be no one. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand hovered above the knob, then finally turned it. She sat in a chair by the window, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Her hair was silver, now pulled into a neat bun. She wore a navy cardigan I remembered from years ago, and her shoes were the same sensible flats she used to wear to PTA meetings. For a moment, I thought she might not recognize me. Then she looked up. Her eyes sharpened like a camera coming into focus. Eliza. Her voice was low. Not surprised. Not frightened. Just certain. I closed the door behind me. Saturday down across from her. I didn't speak. She reached for my hand, and for a second I let her hold it. I never believed you were dead, she whispered. My throat tightened. Why didn't you look for me? I did. Quietly. Your father controlled everything. My phone, my bank account, the staff. I couldn't even get online without him knowing. And when I asked questions, he gave me pills. Said I was unstable. That I'd imagined things. She looked away. I let him convince me I was broken. I pulled my hand back. She didn't flinch. I wrote letters, she said. Dozens. But he took them. Burned some. I found a few hidden under the mattress once sealed and stamped. But they never made it out. I felt the edges of myself start to crack. I had come here prepared for guilt, maybe excuses. I hadn't expected remorse. Then she reached under the blanket on her lap and pulled out a small wooden box. Old. Scuffed. Locked with a tiny brass latch. I kept this hidden in the false bottom of my nightstand. Your father never found it. After the stroke, they moved me here. I asked one of the nurses I trusted to bring it. She didn't ask questions. She set it in my lap. Inside were things I never expected to see again. The original medical intake forms from the patients I had found in the county clerk's office. Unredacted, signed. A cassette tape labeled July 2013 in my father's handwriting. And a letter. Unsealed, folded 3 times. I unfolded it slowly. It began with my father's name. Full name. A confession. A statement of liability. He wrote that he had altered dosages. Changed patient notes. That he had paid off a compliance officer to ignore audits. That he had silenced a whistleblower in 2012 using cash and threats. And at the end, he had written something I didn't understand. To Amanda and Eliza. You were never meant to see this. But, if you do, I hope you understand. No signature. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't cry. Vivian reached for the tape. That was his voice. He recorded it after you left. He said if anyone ever came back asking questions, he wanted the truth told on his terms. But he never gave it to anyone. I kept it. Why are you giving it to me now? Because I may not be here much longer. And I want someone to do what I couldn't. I looked at her then. Really looked. Her hands trembled. Her eyes, though clear, carried something that hadn't been there before. Shame. Or perhaps relief. You don't have to forgive me, she said. I don't expect that, but don't let him get away with it. I nodded. I slipped the tape, the files, and the letter into my bag. I locked the box and handed it back. Keep the box. I stood to leave. Will you come back someday? Maybe. She smiled faintly. Then she whispered, tell Amanda I never stopped loving her. I paused at the door. Then walked out without a word. In the parking lot, I called Hamilton from the burner phone. We have it, I said. Enough to reopen the case. He exhaled sharply. Good, that's good. What changed? I looked back at the window on the second floor. She was still sitting there. I'm not going back alone, I said. He didn't ask what I meant, neither did I. I had spent nearly a decade building a life in the shadows, and now I was preparing to walk straight into the light. Not as a ghost. Not as a rumor. As myself. With everything I had gathered, every piece of evidence, every painful truth. The vow renewal would be held at a private estate in Montecito, a sprawling vineyard-turned-event space complete with string lights, stone arches, and a guest list packed with the who's who of California politics. Amanda wanted it that way. Or maybe Vivian did. Either way, it was a showcase. A spectacle. Perfect for what we had planned. Agent Drew Hamilton met me at a motel just outside Santa Barbara. He wore plain clothes and a sun-faded baseball cap, but nothing could disguise the sharp focus in his eyes. He set the briefcase on the table between us, flipping it open to reveal printed dossiers, a folded press itinerary, and a burner phone. Press passes had already been arranged. Not under our real names. Under the name of a boutique law firm in San Francisco specializing in health compliance and malpractice cases. A firm that did not technically exist but had enough of a digital footprint to fool a few eager interns doing background checks. The plan was simple, at least on paper. I would attend as Clara Monroe, legal counsel representing a coalition of malpractice survivors invited to deliver a brief statement at the post-ceremony cocktail hour. The request had gone through Noah's campaign team, couched in vague promises of collaboration and public relations benefits. Noah agreed without hesitation. Of course he did. His re-election strategy hinged on the image of a clean-slate healthcare reformer. A progressive rising star. His public calendar said he'd be unveiling a new initiative that day. We knew better. It wasn't just the hypocrisy that burned, it was the history. Noah Whitford had been a final-year med student interning under my father during the summer of 2014. Back then, he was quiet, eager to please, always nodding, always taking notes. He was also the first one to file an internal report about a patient's death at the clinic, a young woman with a history of psychiatric care who was given a dangerous combination of medications. The report disappeared. Noah said nothing further. And 6 months later, he was offered a letter of recommendation glowing enough to win him a residency at one of the most competitive hospitals on the West Coast. He built his entire reputation on that foundation. A career launched on silence. Now he was married to my sister, running for Congress, delivering speeches about ethics and mental health access. I wondered if he even remembered the girl's name. Her mother had left voicemails. I'd heard them. Long pleading messages to Dr. Barrett's office asking for someone to explain. No one ever called back. I had every file now. The emails, the case notes, the time-stamped security footage showing Noah in the office that day standing in the hallway while my father altered the medication records. The footage had been flagged but never reviewed until Drew found it. Back at the motel, Drew closed the briefcase. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. I looked him straight in the eye. "She deserves to know. Amanda. And the public does too. They've been lied to long enough." He nodded. There was a moment of silence between us, heavy but calm. "You're not just confronting them, Eliza. You're resetting history. Don't underestimate how messy that can get." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. I'd already spent years drowning in the mess. I wasn't afraid of the tide anymore. That night, I sat in my car and pulled out the stack of letters I'd never mailed. Pages of ink-stained hope addressed to Amanda. I had rewritten some of them over the years, unsure if I still believed the words. Others I left exactly as they were, raw, trembling, filled with a kind of grief only sisters understand. I picked one. The one I'd written the week after my funeral. "Dear Amanda, I wonder if you felt it. If you sensed that the story they told about me didn't quite fit. I wonder if you lit a candle because you believed, or because you were told to. I still remember your laugh echoing through the hallway when we were kids. It never belonged to silence. I forgive you. Even if you never ask me to. Even if you think I'm gone. Love, Eliza." I folded it again, my hands trembling. The next morning I met Drew near the estate. He handed me a press badge, a slim folder with talking points, and a tiny microphone embedded in what looked like a brooch. The estate gates opened at exactly noon. Cars rolled in like clockwork. Women in silk gowns and pastel hats, men in tailored suits laughing too loud. Cameramen, reporters, campaign volunteers. The air smelled of jasmine and ambition. I stepped through the archway into the courtyard, heels clicking against polished stone. No one looked twice. No one questioned why my face seemed familiar. Amanda stood under the arbor, in a pale blue dress, one hand wrapped around Noah's arm. She looked thinner than I remembered. Not in a sickly way. In a nervous, stretched, too thin kind of way. She smiled for the cameras, but it didn't reach her eyes. Vivian was there too, regal as ever in a champagne-colored ensemble and matching gloves. She scanned the crowd with practiced poise, stopping only briefly when her eyes brushed mine. Her lips didn't move, but her gaze lingered. Just long enough to make me wonder if she knew. The ceremony began. Vows were exchanged. Applause erupted. A string quartet played something soft and forgettable. And then came the announcement. "We'd like to invite Clara Monroe, legal counsel representing the Malpractice Survivors Coalition, to share a few words about the future of health policy reform in this state." That was my cue. I stepped forward, one hand steadying the microphone, the other clutching the folder Drew had prepared. I looked directly at Noah, and then at Amanda. The silence before I spoke was the longest breath I'd taken in 10 years, and I wasn't alone anymore. The air outside the event hall in downtown Ridgefield carried a strange stillness. Not silence exactly, but the kind of quiet that pressed against your skin, reminding you to breathe slower, steadier. I stood under the shadow of the large awning, my hand gripping the edge of my black blazer. My palms were dry. My steps were deliberate. I had rehearsed this entrance 1,000 times in my head, yet nothing could prepare me for the rush of adrenaline that surged as I stepped through the double doors. The room was lavish. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above rows of white and gold chairs. A flower arch framed Amanda and Noah as they stood before their guests, the renewal of their vows, a carefully curated spectacle of second chances. Cameras hovered at the edges, operated by discreet media crews dressed to blend in. No one noticed me at first. My black suit was sleek but unassuming. The sunglasses concealed my eyes, but not my presence. I didn't speak until I reached the middle aisle. I stopped, removed my glasses, and said calmly, clearly, "Eliza Barrett." It was like a detonator had been pressed. A woman gasped. One of Amanda's bridesmaids stumbled backward, clutching her pearls. Amanda herself looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her bouquet slipped from her hands and thudded against the hardwood floor. Noah's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward the guests, toward the cameras, then toward the podium where a branded sign read, "Office of Senator Noah Whitmore." My father, seated in the front row beside his polished legal team, went rigid. The color drained from his face. For a moment he seemed too stunned to breathe. I continued walking, each step slow and steady, until I reached the platform. I turned to face the crowd, all their eyes fixed on me. Some squinted confused, others began whispering. And yet not a single phone was lifted. Not a single person dared interrupt. I pulled a folder from the inside pocket of my blazer. "These," I said, "are medical records from Brighton Hills Medical Center between the years of 2012 and 2014. They include patient files previously reported as lost, falsified, or misclassified. Among them is the chart of Maria Solano, whose cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest due to pre-existing conditions." I paused, then raised my eyes. That was a lie. A ripple moved through the room like a silent wave. I could see someone near the back recording now. I welcomed it. Maria Solano died on the table during a procedure performed by Dr. Howard Barrett. My father. The supervising intern at the time was Noah Whitmore. Noah's face turned ashen. He took a step back, bumping into the edge of the stage. I turned slightly toward the officiant, who had taken a cautious step to the side, then faced the crowd again. "I have with me a signed confession. Notarized. Dated. Handwritten. It was never meant to surface, but it exists. And it proves a deliberate effort to conceal medical negligence, falsify death records, and intimidate a whistleblower who didn't survive long enough to testify." I held up another envelope. "And this," I added, "is the whistleblower's internal complaint. Submitted to Attorney Robert Porter's office. Sealed, ignored, and erased from the firm's records." I looked at the front row. "Mr. Porter, I believe you recognize your own handwriting." The old man didn't move at first. Then his fingers trembled visibly and a bead of sweat rolled down the side of his temple. His mouth opened, but no words came. My father leaned over and whispered something to him, and Porter shook his head slowly, as if the weight of it all had finally broken his neck from the inside. I stepped aside as a figure emerged from the back. Agent Drew Hamilton. His FBI badge visible now. Behind him came two more agents and two uniformed officers from Ridgefield PD. The room was frozen. Drew's voice cut through the air like a cold blade. "Dr. Howard Barrett, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, medical malpractice, resulting in death, conspiracy to commit fraud, and destruction of legal evidence." Gasps erupted across the room. My father stood up sharply, chest heaving. "This is ridiculous. This is a public stunt." "She's not, she's your daughter," Agent Hamilton said evenly, interrupting him. "And we have confirmation of identity via DNA and living witness." My father's face contorted, not in anger this time, but in something almost like fear. He looked toward Amanda as if expecting her to speak. But she didn't. She couldn't. Her mouth hung open slightly, her eyes locked on mine. I stepped down from the stage as the officers approached him. He resisted for half a second, then lowered his arms in surrender. They cuffed him quietly, firmly. As they led him past me, his eyes met mine. There was no recognition, no apology. Only the cold disbelief of a man who never thought the past would catch up to him. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I simply said, "I'm not dead, Dad. I was just buried under your lies." He said nothing. Just turned away. Porter was next. He didn't protest. His shoulders slumped as if decades had finally caved in on him. Outside, a few reporters had begun to gather. The story was already spreading. It wasn't just a scandal anymore, it was a reckoning. I turned back toward Amanda. She stood on the stage, still her veil sliding off one shoulder. Her hands trembled as she gripped the podium. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper meant only for me. "You were never supposed to come back." I gave her a long, quiet look. I did, and this time I wasn't leaving. The morning after the ceremony, my name was everywhere. I didn't even have to search it. It greeted me the moment I turned on the television in the hotel room. Eliza Barrett. Headlines were using it like it had never vanished, like it hadn't been quietly erased from family trees and dinner tables. A news anchor in a perfectly crisp blazer said it 3 times before cutting to grainy footage of the arrest. There, I was frozen on screen in that black suit, standing beside Agent Hamilton while my father was handcuffed, Noah gaping like someone had punched the wind out of him. The footage looped on every major network by noon. By the afternoon, the hashtag #ElizaIsAlive was trending worldwide. People were posting screenshots, making side-by-sides from old family photos someone had clearly leaked. Clips from 10 years ago of Amanda's original wedding, now dissected with the attention of a true crime documentary. Commentators debated the ethics of the Barrett family for 30-minute segments. Analysts speculated what this meant for Noah's campaign, for the future of Barrett Wellness Group, for the upcoming medical licensing reviews across the state. And yet, none of that noise touched me as deeply as one simple message. "Amanda, meet me. Low tide. Parker's Cove. You know the spot." I did know it. That stretch of rocky shore just beyond the last pier where we used to collect sea glass. Where we built sand forts and buried time capsules and once fought so hard over a popsicle that Mom made us hold hands until we apologized. I didn't respond, I just went. The wind had picked up by the time I reached the beach, the kind that whips your hair in sharp directions and makes every word feel more urgent. She was already there, sitting on the rocks with her heels tossed beside her and her phone clutched in both hands like she didn't know what else to do with them. She looked up as I approached. I could see it in her face. The confusion, the grief, the anger, but also the exhaustion. Not the kind from lack of sleep, but from the weight of carrying a lie too long. "You're really here," she said, standing slowly. I stayed a few feet back. "I am. You let me think you were dead. You helped them write the eulogy, Amanda." She winced like I'd slapped her. "I didn't write it. Dad had a staffer do it. I read it because they told me I had to. You were 24. Not a child." She dropped her gaze, shoulders curling forward. I was scared. Of him, of what it meant if I wasn't. The wind blew harder, spraying a little mist up from the tide. She brushed her hair out of her face, then turned to sit back down on the rocks. I followed and took the space beside her. We didn't speak for a long moment. "Do you know what it felt like, Amanda? To be dragged into that psych ward while screaming your name, thinking maybe if you heard me you'd help." Her jaw clenched. I believed them. I believed he had to send you away for your own good. And then after, I thought maybe you had hurt yourself. He told you I was unstable, dangerous. He told everyone. I nodded slowly, letting the silence settle again. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I placed it between us. Vivian kept that. The original patient file. And the confession letter. He never meant to send it, but he wrote it. It's in his handwriting. She didn't reach for it right away. She stared at the envelope like it might burn her fingers. He killed that woman, didn't he? The one from the malpractice suit in 2012. He altered her treatment plan. When it went wrong, he blamed a nurse and buried the paperwork. And Noah, he interned that summer. Signed off on it. He knew. You think this vow renewal was about love? It was about positioning. About making him look unshakable before the next primary. Amanda nodded slowly. Her voice cracked. I was going to be First Lady of the state. That's what he kept saying, like it was some prize, like it was worth anything. Is that what you wanted? I wanted to matter, Eliza. I wanted to be seen. So did I. She finally picked up the envelope. Her hands trembled. I don't know how to fix this. You don't. You just stop protecting it. We sat there as the tide rolled closer. The wind quieter now. Amanda sniffed, wiped her face, then turned to me again. I'm dropping out of Noah's campaign. I've already spoken to the PR team. Told them I need a break from public life. That's a start. Also, Mom had more documents. Letters. She gave me a box months ago and told me not to open it unless something happened to Dad. I think she always knew this day might come. Will you give it to me? Amanda hesitated for a breath, then nodded. Yes. It's yours. It always should have been. We stood together. She didn't ask me for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. That wasn't what this was. Before I turned to leave, she asked one last thing. Why didn't you run? Because the truth isn't something to escape, it's something to walk through. Even if it breaks everything open. And then I walked away toward the road, toward the next step, toward a life no longer hidden in shadow. The kind of life where names don't vanish. Where stories are not stolen, where truth gets to live. By the following morning, I was no longer just a name trending online. I was on the front page of nearly every major news outlet. Eliza Barrett. Alive. Present. And central to a case that had begun to unravel faster than anyone predicted, the FBI wasted no time. Within 48 hours, they reopened multiple cases previously marked as inconclusive or quietly settled, all tied to the private medical network run by my father and his associates. Names I remembered from files tucked away in the boxes my mother had hidden now surfaced in subpoenas and depositions. Dr. Alan Harris. Dr. Susan Bell. Two more physicians who had signed off on suspicious death certificates or discharged patients without follow-up. Every document, every signature, every lie began to glow under the harsh fluorescent light of federal inquiry. I was no longer a missing daughter, I was a key witness. Special Agent Madeline Kemp became my point of contact. Sharp-eyed, steady voice, no sympathy in her tone but no dismissal either. She treated me not as a victim but as a person whose testimony mattered. Whose memory held weight. Whose story had already shaken a well-established structure. She handed me a list of former patients and their families. Most names I didn't recognize, some I did. One in particular made my breath catch. Lydia Carmichael. Age 8. Cardiac arrest during a routine pediatric checkup. Her file had always bothered me. A child with no documented pre-existing conditions, no familial history of heart disease. And yet she had died within 24 hours of a minor outpatient procedure at my father's clinic. The case had been dismissed. Quickly. Too quickly. I circled the name. 2 days later, a woman showed up outside the temporary apartment the Bureau had arranged for me near downtown Providence. Her coat was soaked from the rain and she clutched an old photo in one hand like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. Her eyes met mine and she didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. You're her, she finally said. Eliza Barrett. I nodded. The air between us thickened. My name's Dana Carmichael. Lydia was my daughter. I invited her in. She didn't sit right away, just stood there, shoulders trembling, until I brought her a towel and poured her some water. I thought I'd never get to say this, she whispered. But thank you. I didn't know what to say. I had never spoken to her back then. I had only read her daughter's file and felt the ache of something wrong I couldn't yet name. She must have sensed my confusion. You didn't just disappear, she said. You did something. Whatever you dug up. They're finally talking about my daughter like she mattered. For the first time in 8 years. Her fingers curled around the photo she still held. It was Lydia at age 6 in a purple tutu, missing her front teeth but smiling like the world had just told her a secret. My throat closed. Dana didn't stay long. She left the photo on the table and said she'd let the lawyers do the rest. She didn't want to be on television. She didn't care about airtime, she just wanted to say thank you. Later that evening, I got an email from a private address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simple course invitation, fall term. I clicked it. Dear Miss Barrett, we at Fairfield College of Law are preparing a fall curriculum update and are creating a guest-led seminar titled Ethics in Law and Medicine. Your story, your voice, and your insight are profoundly valuable. We would be honored to have you join us as a visiting lecturer should your schedule allow. The students would benefit deeply from hearing about not only your experience but the ethical framework you fought to uphold. Please let us know if this is something you'd be willing to explore. Warm regards, Dr. Leanne Westbrook, Dean of Curriculum Affairs. I reread it twice. Then a third time. I hadn't thought about teaching. I hadn't thought about law school in years, except as something I had nearly finished, something that felt like a different life altogether. But the idea lingered like warmth in a cold room. Not just because of the prestige, because of what it meant. Sharing, not hiding. Using the story not as a wound but as a mirror. So others could look in and ask the right questions before it was too late. I didn't reply that night. The next morning, another knock on the door came. This time it was Agent Kemp, and she didn't smile. You're going to be called to testify, she said. Likely next month. Preliminary hearings are starting for Barrett and Porter. And some of the sealed settlements might be overturned depending on what else we find. She placed a folder on the table thicker than before. What's this? I asked. Timeline. Charges. And media strategy. The press is going to keep circling. You'll need to decide what you want your role to be from here on out. I opened it. My father's name was on the first page. Fraud. Malpractice. Negligent homicide. And 3 counts of evidence tampering. There would be more. The ink was barely dry. For a second I imagined the courtroom, not as a victim behind glass, but as a witness. Present. Sharp. Ready. The years they'd taken from me weren't coming back, but the words I'd speak in that room, they'd count. I picked up Lydia's photo and placed it next to the file. I looked into that toothless smile again. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. The world had already buried me once. They weren't going to get a second chance. I looked up at Agent Kemp. Tell the Bureau I'll be ready. Tell the court I'll be honest. And tell the press they can ask their questions. But this time they'll be hearing my answers. All of them. It was just past 6 in the morning when I pulled into the old cemetery in Northbridge. The summer fog hadn't lifted yet, so the air was thick and quiet the way it gets in New England before the sun burns through. I parked by the edge near the sycamore tree I remembered from childhood visits to my grandfather's grave and walked the rest of the way in. Plot C, row 9, stone 12. My name was still etched into it. Eliza June Barrett, 1993. 2015, beloved sister, kind soul gone too soon. The first time I saw the gravestone had been in a grainy photo years ago from Amanda. She had taken it during one of her many solo visits and sent it to a P.O. box we used back then. I remembered the caption in her handwriting. For the world you're gone. For me never. Now I stood in front of it, flesh and blood. No disguise, no fear. Just the strange surreal weight of visiting your own grave. The marble was a little weathered, speckled with moss at the base. Someone had left a dried bouquet there, brittle with time. I knelt and cleared the dead stems away, then reached into my satchel and pulled out the fresh bouquet I brought. Stargazer lilies, blue hydrangeas, and a sprig of rosemary. My grandmother once said rosemary was for remembrance. I didn't know if I believed in signs anymore, but it felt right. I set them down carefully and let my hand rest on the stone. Cold but grounding. Then I opened the side pocket of my bag and took out the old envelope Amanda had once placed in the urn. When she gave it to me days ago, she said nothing. Just pressed it into my hand, her eyes rimmed red, and said, "Read it when you're ready." I had waited. I had needed space from everything. From her tears, from the noise. From the questions everyone still wanted answered. Now I sat on the low concrete bench beside the grave and broke the seal. The paper was creased, faintly smudged from where water or maybe tears had touched it. Her handwriting was exactly as I remembered it. Sharp on the angles, looped on the vowels. familiar in a way that hurt. Eliza. If you're reading this, then maybe somehow, some impossible way you're alive. Maybe this is foolish, but I needed to write it. I needed to tell you that I am sorry. I didn't believe you back then. I should have. I should have seen it. I was so desperate to keep the family from falling apart that I ignored the parts already broken. I let them tell me you were unstable, that you needed help, that you didn't know what you were saying. But the truth is, I didn't listen. I was afraid of what would happen if you were right. If you are out there living a different life, I hope you are safe. I hope you are happy. I hope you found someone who sees you for who you are, not who they wanted you to be. And if you're gone, if this urn is all that's left, then I hope you can forgive me. I would give anything to go back and believe you when it mattered. Love always, Amanda. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat with it. With all of it. The guilt in her words, the longing. The truth she had only been brave enough to admit when she thought I was already ashes. It was not an apology I needed anymore. I had grown beyond needing others to believe me just to feel real. But it still mattered that she had written it. That some part of her had fought to reach me even when she believed it was too late. I folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it beside the bouquet. Then I pulled out the sheet of paper I had written the night before. Just one page. No drama, no final monologue. Just the words I needed to leave behind. To whoever visits this grave, you may know my name. You may know a version of my story. What you should know is this: I lived. I lived through being silenced. I lived through being erased. I lived through years of hiding, of rebuilding, of waiting. I was once a ghost walking through the edges of other people's lives, afraid to step into the light. But I am no longer that ghost. This name on this stone, it doesn't define me. I am more than what they buried. I am Eliza Barrett. I choose my own light now. That's all. I placed the letter in a small sealed pouch and tucked it behind the flowers, wedging it so the wind wouldn't carry it away. Then I stood, gave the gravestone one last look, and whispered, not goodbye. Just no longer hiding. As I turned back toward the path, the sun began to pierce through the fog. The sky shifted from ash gray to pale gold, and the trees seemed less like silhouettes and more like living things again. I didn't know what came next. Testimony. More press. Maybe that lecture at Fairfield College. Maybe none of it, but I knew I wouldn't be returning to the shadows. Not anymore. The courthouse steps felt like a stage that day. Reporters lined the barriers, cameras pointed from every angle, microphones stacked like a wall of sound. I had dreamed of disappearing 1,000 times before, but now for the first time I stood to be seen. Beside me stood my attorney, Janice Albright, a woman who had believed in my truth long before the press ever caught wind of it. Behind her was Amanda, clutching the folded statement I had written that morning. She didn't speak, didn't wave. She was just there. And that mattered more than I could say. The press conference had been my idea. I didn't want my story spun by someone else. I didn't want to be a mystery, a tragic case, or a headline with no ending. I wanted to reclaim my own narrative, to say the words myself. So I stepped forward. Thank you for being here. Some of you may have known me by a different name. Some of you may have believed I was dead. 10 years ago, that's exactly what they wanted you to believe. I paused and let the silence settle. My name is Eliza Barrett. I was born in Ridgefield, Connecticut. I was a pre-med student. I had a family, a future, and a truth no one wanted to hear. When I spoke up, I was erased. My identity, my records, even my death certificate were forged. I became a ghost because telling the truth meant risking everything. But I am not a ghost anymore. I am standing here to tell you that silence is not safety. And hiding is not healing. The words came out steady. I had rehearsed them in my mind for weeks, but now that I said them aloud, they felt heavier, realer, like each word was hammering a nail into the coffin of the past. I am here to announce the launch of the Barrett Foundation, a legal and advocacy organization committed to helping victims of medical abuse, whistleblower suppression, and enforced silence. Our goal is to protect those who are threatened into vanishing. To make sure what happened to me never happens again. From the corner of my eye, I saw Amanda wipe her cheek. She wasn't crying hard, just enough to blur the edges. Behind her, a few members of the press lowered their cameras. Some looked shaken. Some scribbled furiously. I turned to Janice and nodded. She stepped up and fielded questions while I stood still, letting the noise move around me. It wasn't overwhelming this time. It was just life. A very loud, very public life I had fought hard to return to. Afterward, we moved inside. I had one final stop that mattered more to me than any headline. In a private courtroom upstairs, a judge sat with a small file in front of him stamped in red, "Case reopened." He looked at me, at the affidavit, at the updated forensic records, the DNA reports, and the prior suppression files. Then he said, "Miss Barrett, I want to formally apologize on behalf of this court. Your name was taken from you. Let's fix that today." And just like that, it was done. In the hallway outside, Amanda met me with a small box. Inside was my original birth certificate, the one she had found among our mother's things. She handed it to me like a fragile relic. I held it carefully. The edges were faded, but the name was clear. Eliza June Barrett. I looked at her. "Thank you for coming." "I should have come sooner," she said. "I was scared." "You're here now." She nodded. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't look away. I walked her to the elevator. We didn't say much more. Some wounds don't close with words. But I knew she would stand behind me when I gave the keynote next week at Fairfield. She had already RSVP'd. That night, back in the apartment I now called home, I lit one candle and opened the window. The breeze from the harbor carried in the scent of salt and summer rain. I sat at my desk and wrote the speech I would deliver to a lecture hall full of law students. The title was simple: Ethics in Silence. But the first line wasn't from a textbook, it was mine. 10 years ago, they thought I was dead. Today, I live so they never forget. I closed my laptop and let the silence wrap around me like something familiar but not frightening. I had learned how to sit with it. Not as a prisoner, but as a witness to my own life. If you've ever been made to feel invisible, if they called you a ghost before you had a chance to speak, if your story was written by someone else before you got the pen, remember this. You're still here. And if you ever felt like you disappeared from your own life, tell that story. Loud or quiet. In courtrooms or classrooms or whispered phone calls at midnight. Tell it. Don't let anyone write your ending for you.